Hello folks and welcome back to the channel. DJ here as usual, and I have news for you, and it's concerning to me and it should be concerning to you. And what I'm going to talk about is freedom of speech being curtailed, and it's going through the House of Lords at the moment to become law. This is very, very worrying if we want to keep free speech, because George Orwell, in his novel 1984, forecast that our speech would be controlled, and therefore our movement would be controlled, our actual thinking would be controlled, and we would just be automatons under the government auspices. Now, we know in the USA, Donald Trump is fighting this, but he's receiving a lot of setback on it. But here in Europe and in Britain itself, we are finding ourselves under the boot. And I mean the boot. We are being stopped from speaking our mind. We're being stopped because they want to introduce all these idiotic ideas, 110 now I think it is, genders and furries, which are people who think they're animals, and cats and dogs, and children think, boys at school thought there was a dinosaur and a stallion, and a young girl 13 years of age in a class thought she was a cat and replied meow. And the people who objected were the ones who were thrown out. The two girls in the girls' classroom where she thought, when she replied meow to the teacher, told her off, and the teacher supported the person who thought she was a cat and said, we must respect individual likes and understandings and genders. It's ridiculous. But let me get to this, the news itself, or I'll lose track, won't I? It's a cross-party group of free speech defending peers in the House of Lords, and they'll take the floor tonight to fight back against Clause 20, a draconian proposal that would make employers liable for offensive speech overheard by their staff. Among those leading the charge are Lord Young of Acton. He's the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union. We'll call it FSU later on. If I forget to tell you, it's Free Speech Union. Baroness Fox of Buckley, Baroness Deach, Lord Strathcavan, Lord MacDonald of River Glavin, and Baroness Mayer. And if passed, Clause 20 would make employers liable if an employee so much as overhears a joke, a comment, or a political opinion from a member of the public and decides to take offence. From a member of the public, employers will be responsible for what members of the public speak and say in earshot of their employees. That includes remarks not directed at them or even at anyone in particular. A single overheard comment on the course of employment could trigger legal risks unless the employer can prove they took all reasonable steps to prevent it. It's so worrying. But what does that actually mean in practice? The law provides little clarity, and the threshold is vague. Employers will be left guessing what counts as reasonable in the eyes of a tribunal, and many will play it safe by preemptively censoring anything that could be construed as offensive. Expect sweeping restrictions on what customers, clients and visitors are allowed to say. Even the Equality and Human Rights Commission, known as EHRC, the statutory body responsible for enforcing the Equality Act, has warned that Clause 20, and this wording is particular, goes too far. In briefing to peers, it cautioned that forcing employers to take all reasonable steps to prevent third-party harassment could lead to excessive limitations on debate. I don't think could, I think it will. Parliament, it must ensure that free speech is not a subject of disproportionate interference. In statutory terms, in Clause 20 amends the Equality Act of 2010. by reinstating employers' liability for the harassment of their employees by third parties. This provision was originally included in the 2010 Act, but removed by an amendment in 2013 because it was onerous. But this new duty is significantly more onerous than its predecessor and likely to cause widespread confusion, legal overreach, and profound chilling effects on free speech. That's why in tonight's debate, the group of peers opposing Clause 20 will step in where the government won't, refuses, putting forward a suite of targeted amendments designed to blunt the bill's most authoritarian edges. I'm letting it sink in. Do you realise what it means? You may not be an employer, you probably aren't an employer, but it means you're having a chat at work with someone overhears you speaking to someone else, takes offence, and let's face it, people are taking offence at the silliest things at the moment, takes offence, reports you, the employer dismisses you by law, legally, because he's got to pay compensation because he allowed you to say it, even though he didn't know what he was going to say. That's how onerous this clause is. One amendment that these House of Lords people are going to say clarifies that employers should not be held liable for political, moral, religious or social views expressed in public unless those views are grossly offensive. That phrase doesn't mean a bit rude, not very inclusive, or even very Brexity. It reflects a much higher legal threshold drawn from criminal law, where courts are consistently interpreted the phrase to mean material that shocks or outrages the standards of a reasonable person, not merely speech someone finds upsetting or provocative. In short, the lawful expression of belief, even if overheard by an employer, should not be treated as an harassment. But this clause will say it is. Another amendment carves out exemptions from the clause's scope for pubs, sporting venues and universities. Why? Because these are places where informal speech and robust debate are part of the cultural fabric and should never be chilled by the threat of litigation. What you say in a pub with your mates should not be part of litigation unless it is aimed at someone or a group of people and is downright nasty. A third amendment seeks to reintroduce the basic safeguard Parliament once understood, that one-off incidents shouldn't trigger legal action. Before 2013, employers were only liable after two previous incidents. Clause 20 tears that up. It's immediate. I heard that, right, in court, where before it was only on the third time you said it because then they knew you was doing it on purpose. Finally, there's a proposal to strike out indirect harassment altogether, a concept so vague it could apply to anything, almost anything overheard. Under this fix, employers would only be liable when speech is actually directed at an employee, not a casual remark elevated into the air, which all of us do at some time or other. The implications of letting Clause 20 through unamended are as farcical as they are far-reaching. Employers may feel obliged to roll out intrusive codes of conduct for customers, to impose speech restrictions on performers, or even automate public-facing roles. So instead of having somebody in the job facing the public like a receptionist, you have a computer, a robot. Pubs might install banter bouncers to eavesdrop on conversations, while emergency services could soon be conducting risk assessments before sending help, in case a distressed caller says something offensive. Worse still, the proposed duty puts different standards on the equality of law on the collision course. It risks making employers liable for offending one group, say easily offending members of the trans community, while trying to respect the lawful beliefs of another, such as the gender-critical feminists. The result, employers left paralysed, trying to navigate the rights hierarchy, where someone somewhere is always ready to take offence. As the Equal Rights body put it, the interaction of third-party protection for discriminated employees would be complex and likely challenging to employers to navigate. But challenging, let's read expensive. Clause 20, impact on higher education, could be especially severe. Under the Equality Act, as it stands, students and visiting speakers are classified as third parties, students and visitors to the university. That means their speech, however provocative, doesn't trigger any legal duties under the Act. In other words, universities aren't responsible for shielding staff and students from things they overhear at a seminar or a debate. And that's true whether the institution is acting as an employer under Part 5 of the Higher Education Provider Act or under Part 6, while universities often over-apply the Act in practice. I'll give you an example. In 2023, the Freedom of Speech Union brought a legal challenge against the University of Essex over policies that, like many across the university sectors, purported to ban certain forms of student speech on the grounds that it created a hostile environment. You know, I want a safe place. He said a hurty word. For staff, the target gender critical views. Can't have gender critical views. But the FSU took them to court, and the university, they agreed, we've overreached ourselves. We've got no duties to police people's thoughts, students' thoughts, or the visitors' thoughts. But under Clause 20, they will have a duty. It will make it legal, and they will be responsible to stop people saying dirty words. Freedom of speech is at risk in everyday life. And if we do not stop it, if we do not stop this clause, if we do not stop this freedom of speech curtailment, I'm afraid we are going to be in the dystopian world of George Orwell's 1984, where people were frightened to say anything at all except the government line. It didn't matter. And if you've read 1984, and I do recommend you do if you haven't, and reread it if you have, you'll find that the hero, anti-hero, is told 2 and 2 is 5. And he says, no, it isn't, it's 4. And he got into so much trouble eventually. He's asked, now, what's 2 and 2? And he said, 5, sir. This, if you read the book, you realise that's not a stupid idea. It was how propaganda, freedom of speech, stopping freedom of speech, created a world where everyone was a slave to what the government wanted them to believe. So, please bear with me. Freedom of speech is something that should be valued in society, and we need to value it highly, because if we don't, we are going to be slaves to the government and the authorities in charge. Have a good day, be safe, be good, and goodbye for now from DJ. Bye for now. Oh, don't forget to subscribe. It doesn't cost you a penny, not even a cent, nor even a rupee. It's totally free to subscribe to the channel. So press that subscribe button, make your comments known, and if you like, press the like button as well. Makes me happy. And you want to make me happy, don't you? course you do. Bye for now. Bye.